In this video, we will show you how to add graphs to a WeWeb project using our Charts extension plugin. We will demonstrate using a line chart in guided and advanced mode, but the principles we cover in this video are transferable no matter what style of chart you're trying to add to your project. So first, let's add the Charts plugin. In the extensions, we can add the Charts plugin. Once we have added this plugin to our project, and we don't add it by default because we don't want to overload a project with a library of charts if the project doesn't need it. But once you've added the plugin, you will have access to charts components, which you can also access by going to the add menu in the charts plugins category. And then you can drag and drop any item you want on the page. By default, it will come with a variable that includes fake data. If you're just getting started, we recommend that you enable this, that you include the variables, so you can disable them by unselecting it, but you can also enable them and place the component. That way, by default, you see this little plug shows that some data is added to the charts, and you can see some data here. So you can review the variable in here. You have your fake data here. So this is what the data looks like, what it needs to look like when you are using the guided mode. So here we have a set of data with 7 objects, and each object has 2 pieces of information: the month in which it occurred and the amount, the data, a corresponding data. We said that the x-axis would be the month, so we could change that and it could be the data. In that case, you would see the field data here, but we don't want that. We want the x-axis to be our month. And the y-axis, we said it was data. Again, we could change that. It could be January to July, but we want this to be the data amount. Here, the item count is 1 for each because we have only 1 item per month. What we want is a field summary with the data and our aggregate value. You can play around with these settings to display the information you need in the way you need it. You can change the colors. Here we only have one data set, so it's color 1 that is being displayed. We could change this to green, for example. And here our legend says data, because that is the name of the field we mapped on our y-axis. We could choose to remove the legend. Here in the Style tab, we can customize the style of the chart a little bit, so we can hide the legend or display it. We could change the line style so that it's more rounded and change the grid color so it's red, for example. This is a little bit ugly, so let me go back to my default style. So you can play around with the style of the chart in guided mode here, and in the settings, again in guided mode, you can decide what to display and how to display it. In our case, let's say we wanted to display a more complex set of data. So instead of having only 1 line with our monthly data, we would want 2 lines with 2 sets of data. So for example, items that were purchased versus items that were rented. So in order to do this, we will need to update our data. And here we're using a variable, but this data would most likely be coming from your backend. So it would need to be structured in this way. It would need to be an array with objects, and all the information you need would be in those objects. So let me just copy paste an array that I built already just to save some time. And I'm going to replace this by a new array. So in this array, I have the same data, but this time I added a type for each object. And the type tells me if it's a rental or if it's a purchase. So if I save this, and here my fake data now contains the rental type and also the purchase type, but I still have, so that data information and then month information. And now, in order to display two lines, I can group by type. So now I have two lines, one for rentals in green and one for purchases in blue. And I can change this color, can change it to pink here. So now it's the purchases are pinkish, reddish, and the rentals are green. If I wanted to, instead of ordering by default, I could order alphabetically. So if I saying I'm ordering based on the x-axis, because these are text elements, it will be in ascending order alphabetically. If these were numbers, it would be an ascending order based on smaller to larger items, or I can order by the value in Y, so from the smallest to the largest. It doesn't make a lot of sense, so I'll go back to default. And if I had items where there was no value, I could select on to make sure that these are displayed. Let's say, for example, that I did not have any data for April. Let me change this in the variable. So in April, I will remove this data information here, and I will do it as well for the second April object. So now if I save this, you can see I have January, February, March, May, because there's no value. The values for April are empty, but if I switch on, April is displayed again. There's no value here, so the line breaks, but at least I have the information that I had nothing in April. And of course, it would make more sense in this particular use case if we had value 0, but it can happen that you simply don't have any values. So here I added value 0 for the rental object, but not yet for the purchase. So I would need to add again this value for the purchase object as well. Okay, so we showed you how to design a simple chart using the guided mode. Now let's try to design the same chart using the advanced mode and then take it one step further by leveraging the power of the options available in the Charts.js library. The first big difference between the guided mode and the advanced mode is how your data needs to be structured. So with the guided mode, we saw that all the data needed to be in an array. So you would have an array of objects where you have all the information that you then want to display on the page. So for example, we want an x-axis that displays the month. So we need to have a key that refers to that month and a value that refers to that month. Here we want to display the data value on our y-axis, so we need to have that value inside each of our objects. So in guided mode, we have one array with a list of objects, and each object has the data that we want to display. So if in your backend your data is not structured that way, you might need a workflow on page load, for example, to structure the data in the proper way so that the guided mode can make use of that data. Or you might need to do something in your backend so that your backend returns the data in a format that the guided mode can understand. The advanced mode is different. So let's add a new line chart. And here, instead of having this fake data, we will unbind this and move to advanced mode. Now, in advanced mode, we can bind 3 items: the labels of the chart, the datasets, and the options of the chart. To understand what this means, we need to go and read the charts.js documentation. So here I'm on the line chart documentation, and I have one example chart. This comes with a configuration telling me it's a line chart. I don't care about this. It also comes with a setup. I care a lot about this. So here you see this data variable is an object, and this object includes a reference to labels, which would correspond to this little plug here, and also a reference to datasets, which is an array, and that I could bind here. We also have options here in WeWeb. We will see how we can do that, add those in the charts.js documentation directly. Before moving back to WeWeb, I want to show you how this works. And we would recommend that you build your chart here using the charts.js documentation playground. And then once you're confident, once you understand how you need to build your labels or datasets or options, then you can move back to WeWeb and bind those values here. So let's start here by creating a second dataset. So we have a first dataset, and we will copy it, add a comma and to separate it, and create a new one. So now I have 2 datasets that are both called my first dataset. So let's rename them rental and purchase. Now this looks closer to what we have here, except both have exactly the same values, so they're just on top of each other, and they also have the same color. So let's change these values. Let's just say go. All right. So now I have 2 lines, but they're both the same color. I can change that by changing this border color. Let's say red. So this could be, here we're referencing RGB. It could be a hexadecimal. Here we're using the red string, which CSS recognizes. So now we have 2 different colors. We can play around with other properties as well. So for example, the tension, we could change to 0.3. We see that now this is more rounded. And same if we change it here. The line is more rounded. If we change it to 0, then this is very straight. If we change it to 1, it looks very weird. So let's move it back to 0.3. We could play around with the fill property. So this fills in this chart here. Instead of being white, it's a little grayish. So let's move it back to false if we don't like the style. Basically, you can play around with all these properties, and you can go through the charts.js docs. You have a set of properties. So let's say, for example, we could use border dash as well, which expects a number inside an array. So let's try it here. Let's just add a comma, border dash, and here. There we go. So now we have this line is dashed, and we see this is reflected in our legend here. We could change 10 so that the dashes are longer, or move back to 1 so they're just tiny little dashes. So you can play around with these properties to design the chart in whatever style you wish. And once you're ready, so let's say we're ready, we can copy this array, and in WeWeb, we can move to JavaScript and say return and just paste the array. So we know that it already works because we tested it here. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the legend here goes on the left, whereas in our charts JS documentation, it went to the top. So what should we do if we want to replicate this and move our legend to the top? In chart.js, that is a configuration option. So if we go back to the charts docs in the configuration section in legend, we can see how to configure the legend of a chart. We're going to play around with the display first and then the position. So back on our line chart, instead of the setup where we can influence the labels and datasets, we will go to configuration. And here we will add options. And the options we can refer to is the legend plugin option. So this would be an object that refers to the plugins. And inside that plugins object, we will refer to the legend option. And here we will work with legend properties. So for example, display false. Now this removed the display. So the legend is no longer displayed. Let's move back to true. And let's play around with the position. So position will be top. This is moving it to the left, which I find strange. It needs to be a string. So let's do this. All right, now let's copy this object inside WeWeb. Here, move to JavaScript and paste this. So now, instead of having my legend on the left, I have it at the top. By default in the charts documentation, that's already the case, but by default in WeWeb, it will be to the left. So we need to configure our position here for the legend. We could also decide to change the color of the labels. So let's see here. Let's make this a little bit cleaner so it's easier to read. Here we have display. We have the position. There we go. We'll make it easier to read. All right, so position, and we can change the labels as well. Now this expects an object, and in here we could reference colors like blue. So now the label, the text here is blue. And again, here, this is something, the labels of the legend is something that you can find here. So the property is labels, it expects an object, and then you can have a look at how to configure this information. So you can change the color, you could change the font, change the box width, for example, and it expects a number. So let's do this, box width, and then you can say 40. All right, so now it's bigger. Let's say 400. It's way bigger. And if I remove this completely, you get the idea. So this is for the datasets and the options. Now we still haven't configured our labels. So by default, we're still showing tattoo in, Coruscant, Kashik. So we need to display our labels. And in the charts documentation, the labels were defined here. So they were a reference to a variable that used a function to call out month. So instead of calling this variable to make things clearer, we'll replace the labels by an array of month. So Jan, Feb, there we go. And in WeWeb, we can simply copy this array and paste it here. Now we have the proper labels. Note, however, that if I move February around, if I have July here in second position and February afterwards, then it is displayed in that order. This is really important, and it's a big difference to the guided mode, because remember, in guided, each object contains all the information the chart needs to display it in the right space. So here the x-axis refers to the month, and then we can decide how we order those months. The y-axis decides to group by the type. Whereas in advanced mode, if my labels are not in the correct order, in the order that I want to display the data in, or if the data in my datasets are not in the correct order, then I'm in trouble. I need to make sure that the data array from my datasets are in the same order that matches my labels. So here I want February in the second position and July comes afterwards. So if in my data set the February value was in last position, I would need to move it to second position. That's it. That's how you can start designing charts in WeWeb. 3 key takeaways. 1, it's very important that you understand what data structure the plugin expects, depending on whether you're using guided mode or the advanced mode. In some cases, you will want to process the data and transform it in your backend so that it is returned properly in your front end, or use a WeWeb workflow to structure the data in a way that you can then display it on the chart depending on the mode you chose. Number 2, the advanced mode allows you to do more advanced graphs, to customize the design of the graph completely using the labels, datasets, and options properties that are available in the Charts.js library. Number 3, if you are designing charts in the advanced mode, we recommend that you start the design in the Charts.js documentation directly so that you can see if the options you added or the datasets you added are being displayed as you would expect. And then you can copy paste those arrays or those objects in WeWeb to display that chart in your WeWeb project.